Okay, so to solve two-step equations, we're going to use inverse operations. So, um, inverse in math, when you use the word inverse, that means the opposite. So we're going to use the opposite of the order of operations. So order of operations, or PEMDAS, is we do parentheses, exponents, multiplication, or division. I'll put it on right here. Um, so order of operations says we use parentheses, exponents, multiplication or division, addition or subtraction. That's the order of operations. So when we solve two-step equations, we do the inverse of that. We do addition or subtraction first, and then we do multiplication or division. So that's how we solve the two-step equations. So the next section we have is what are the parts of an equation. So every equation has a few different parts. And so the equation I wrote down was 30 equals 7x plus 3. And the way these equations are formatted are in the y equals mx plus b format. So usually you'll have that constant or that y-intercept. In this case, it's plus 3. You'll have that there. So again, the format is usually in the y equals mx plus b format. They usually give you the y, and you have to find the x or whatever variable they use in that place. So here are the parts of the equation. So we have over here, we have the total. Okay, that y is your total. Okay, and then we have 7x. This is your coefficient. 7 is your coefficient, and the x is your variable. So the 7x is your coefficient and variable. And then the plus 3, that's called your constant. But we also know that constant as the y-intercept. It's the same thing. We're just using different vocabulary this time. So again, that constant is also your y-intercept. So we have the total 30. We have the coefficient and the variable, which is 7x, and then we have plus 3. That's your constant, also known as your y-intercept. So what is the coefficient? The coefficient is the number being multiplied or divided by the variable. So, or you could say the number that is multiplying or dividing the variable. That would be a better way for me to write that definition. So it's the number that's multiplying or dividing, let me multiply or dividing, multiplying or dividing the variable. So the coefficient is the number multiplying or dividing the variable. So in this case, 7 is multiplying that variable 7 times x. And so whatever x is going to be multiplied by 7. We also know the coefficient as slope. Okay, the coefficient, we also know it as slope. So again, it's the same thing we've seen before, it's just different terminology. So how do we solve a two-step equation? If you guys remember, when we had to plug in that y value to find the x value, we were kind of struggling with it. But this is going to help with that because now you will know how to solve these two-step equations when you plug in that y variable. So the first step is to zero the constant. So again, that constant, also known as your y-intercept, the first thing you want to do is zero that out. And so the way to zero that out is to add or subtract by the inverse of that number. So if we go back to the top, we have plus 3, where the inverse of plus 3 is minus 3, so we will subtract 3. Okay, so the first step is to zero the constant. The second step is to remove the coefficient. So either you're going to multiply or divide. If the coefficient is being multiplied, like at the top you see is 7x, it's being multiplied by 7. Well, the inverse of multiplication is division, so we're going to divide by 7, if that makes sense. And so when you do that, you end up isolating a variable, which means isolate means to get by itself. So you want to get the variable by itself, and then you'll have the answer at that point. So how about an example? I'm going to give you several examples actually. So if we start with that initial equation we had, 30 equals 7x plus 3. Remember, the first step is to zero the constant. So I'm going to zero this out. We have plus 3. The opposite or the inverse of that is minus 3. So I'm just going to subtract 3. However, since this is an equation and both sides are equal, whatever I do to one side, I need to do to the other side as well. So we subtract 3 over here. And so we subtract, plus 3 minus 3 is 0, so we zeroed out the constant. And then over here we have 30 minus 3, which is 27, equals, and then we bring down the 7x. We no longer need this 3 though because we zeroed it out. The second step is to remove the coefficient. So the coefficient in this case is 7, okay, and it's being multiplied by x, so it's 7 times the x value. So to remove that, we're going to do the inverse of multiplication, which is division. So we're going to divide by 7. Whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other, so I'm going to divide by 7. So what we see here is that 7 divided by 7 is 1, so that just leaves the 1x. That just goes out the way. On the other side, we have 27 divided by 7, which you would do in your calculator. In this case, the answer is 3.857 or 3 and 857 thousandths. We're going to round to the hundredths place, so we'll do 3.86. And that's what x equals. So again, we started with 30 equals 7x plus 3. The first step was to remove the constant, which was plus 3. So to remove it, we did the inverse, which was minus 3, and that goes out the way, zeroes out. Whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other. So we have 30 minus 3 is 27. So then we brought down the 7x. So 27 equals 7x. And then we divide it by 7 because this is 7 times x, and the inverse of multiplication is division. So we divide by 7. 7 divided by 7 leaves 1x. And then 27 divided by 7 leaves 3.86. And that's your answer. So if we're dealing with slope, we're dealing with direct variation, I should say. We're dealing with direct variation, and they asked you, well, what's that x value? You had to plug in the y value. This is how you would solve it. And so x would equal 3.86. So what happens if they give us, what happens if they give us a fraction? So what happens if we have 1/2 x plus 2 equals 32? So again, the first step will be to remove the constant. In this case, the constant is plus 2. The constant is also known as the y-intercept, which again is plus 2. So we would, since this is plus 2, the inverse is to subtract 2. And then whatever I do to, what I like to do is I like to put a line here. It's like a mirror. So whatever I do to one side of this mirror, I must do to the other. So if I subtract 2 here, I need to subtract 2 over there as well. I draw a line there just so we have something to do our math on. So plus 2 minus 2 is 0. That zeroes out. We bring down that 1/2 x. Bring down my equal sign. 32 minus 2 is 30. And now we have 1/2 x is equal to 30. So in this case, what we do now to remove a fraction we need to multiply by the reciprocal. The reason why we do that is because this is 1/2 times x. And so um, the opposite of multiplication is division. So I would have to divide 1/2 x by 1/2 x. So just the same way we did plus 2 minus 2, I would have to take 1/2 x and divide by 1/2 x. So it would be 1/2 divided by 1/2. But what happens with division when you divide fractions? You keep, switch, flip. So you actually take 1/2 and multiply, flip this one by 2/1. So whenever you divide by that 1/2, because of the fact that you're multiplying by 1/2, the inverse is to divide. Once you do that, you actually end up multiplying by the reciprocal of that fraction. The reciprocal just means you flipped it. So with that said, we skip all this and we just say, well, if you have a fraction in front of a variable, just multiply by the reciprocal. Multiply by 2/1, and that saves us from actually having to write out 1/2 divided by 1/2, which actually ends up being 1/2 times 2/1. We just multiply by the reciprocal. It's the same thing. So we cross these two out because they cancel out. If I was to multiply across, 2 times 1 is 2, 1 times 2 is 2, and so 2/2 equals 1, and it just leaves 1x. We just cancel them out because, again, there's no point in actually going through the math if we know what the answer is going to be. Again, if I multiply across, 2 times 1 is 2, 1 times 2 is 2, 2/2 leaves 1, and so it's just 1x. So instead of actually multiplying that out, we just end up crossing them out because they cancel out. And so that leaves x by itself. However, whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other. So I'm going to take 30, and I'm going to multiply that times 2/1 as well. So 30 times 2 is 60. And then 1 times 1 is 1. And so x equals 60.